Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Pick and Mix Leadership Launchpads podcast. And today we have Yamina Bibi, and I'm really excited about this one because I first sort of tripped over her work. If you haven't already, tripped over her work when she wrote a great book on sort of thriving in your first years of teaching. And my connection was I was leading teacher training at the time. Of course, it was the obvious thing to give everybody as a kind of gift to sort of say, "Well done, you've got this first year done. Now off you go into into the wild, so to speak." So thank you ever so much for finding some time to do this. And I guess we'll start with the obvious one of kind of tell us a bit about kind of what your current role is. I know it's slightly complex, so that'll be interesting. But then more importantly, kind of what's the backstory? How did you get to that?
Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm currently an education project specialist is the fancy title, which I call AKA, also known as project manager. And I'm working with the Chiltern Learning Trust and the Chartered College of Teaching and being luminary on a project about increasing diversity in initial teacher training, which is funded by Sir Lewis Hamilton's Charity Foundation, Mission 44. So it's been
Cool.
really fascinating getting to do this work. And the project is really trying to diversify the workforce based on the NFER research about the lack of ethnic diversity and the kind of systemic racism and disparities that those from Black, Asian, and global majority heritage backgrounds face right from the beginning of teacher training. So, and obviously with the book I wrote, which is about thriving in your first years, it just felt like such a fascinating,
Yeah.
really important piece of work. So I do feel a bit of pressure, but before was a senior leader. So I was an assistant head slash acting deputy head teacher in a secondary school in East London. And that's the majority of my kind of career is in kind of teaching English and school leadership.
All right, that's fascinating. And of course, the first thing that springs to mind, and it's an obvious one for you, I suppose, is that obviously, my passion at the moment is leadership, but we won't have a diverse leadership unless we have a diverse teacher training.
Mhm.
It all starts from there, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that research by the NFER, both in 2024 and now just, recently published in June 2025, about the kind of barriers that global majority heritage trainee teachers are facing from even recruitment processes, like not seeing enough representation even in like marketing or promotional materials, all the way
Yeah,
to which like the way in which we talk about what professionalism looks like, because actually cultural competency is really powerful and really important on interview
massive.
stages. And then thinking about things like retention and how we keep, so actually if you look at the data, the
Yeah,
number of global majority heritage trainees who are applying are actually more than their white peers, but they're more likely to be rejected both at recruitment level and then at retention. They fall off, so there'll be lots coming in and then they're just facing, lots of the research shows that they're facing racism on school placements. So schools
yeah,
do have a place here in kind of dealing with that. And I think when I came into this work, I left my previous senior leadership role without a job, which was a bit scary to do.
wow, that is brave. Yeah,
It's Women Ed's 10% Braver.
yeah,
Job came out, in November after I'd already resigned, and I just thought it was too good to be true, but also too important a work not to try and kind of apply for it and go for it. And I thankfully got the job, and honestly, I've had the best 6 months like in a very long time in terms of what I've been able to do, because I'm also a freelance consultant. So I get to go
yeah,
to schools and support schools with the pedagogy and teaching and learning, which I'm best known for, I think, which I love
yeah. Of
doing so
course.
much.
Well, that's amazing. And the one that I don't know who said this to me once, and it didn't. I was old. I was too old to kind of take advantage of it, I suppose. But that idea of if you can't see it, you can't be it,
Mm,
sort of mantra, isn't it? And I mean, there's a tenuous link to me as a kid, and about not. My social groups were quite low aspiration,
mm,
and so I wasn't metaphorically seeing people pushing themselves or trying to do more or having really high ambitions. And so I just settled into that, which is fascinating. All right, but let's get stuck into this. For those that are new to the podcast, we have a set of kind of, activities that we do, I suppose, almost a sequence. really with the aim of trying to get behind the leader that we might know from kind of LinkedIn or books or stuff like that, and hear a bit more about their stories. And so the first thing we're going to do is what we call a fast friends question, which is interesting. And Yamina's kind of picked three of these to go through during the podcast. And the first one she picked was, for what in your life do you feel most grateful? So tell us about
These are really good questions, by the way. And people don't usually ask me these things, and I think I had a really long think about what I'm really grateful for. And I have to say it's probably my faith, because my faith, I'm a Muslim, I'm visibly Muslim as well, but it's really driven everything that I do. My values, my morals, my upbringing is around our faith. So, when I was going to school, I'd be going to school and then coming home, and an hour later, I'm going to the mosque, and it's really been the foundation of everything I do. But it's also that collective, like the collective mindset of being as part of a community, which has really driven everything that I've done. And I think I'm so grateful to have it, because it's also seen me through some of the ups and downs in life, and it's just always been there. So like, some people don't know that I lost both my parents to cancer recently, and actually faith has been such a huge part of that. And I think without it, maybe I don't know where I'd be. So it's been a really kind of anchor in my life from the minute I was like from a young child all the way up until now. It really has been everything that has kind of driven the work that I do, the way that I think, the kind of morals that I bring. And it's one of the reasons why I ended up writing the book, by the way. I'd happened to tell, so I was approached to write the book, Thriving in Your First Years of Teaching. And I told the editor, she said, "Oh, tell me more about like, why you got into teaching." And I told her about like my family, and I'd said, "Oh, one of the things that Islam teaches us is that knowledge is the one thing that will keep on like being part of your legacy even when you're not here. So like all your good deeds, according to Islam, all your good deeds stop, like everything stops. You won't, once you're dead, you're done. But there are three things that continue, like you keep getting rewarded for, and one of those is knowledge that you've shared,
that.
and
Right.
continue sharing. And that's why I became a teacher, and it's driven so much in my life. So I do feel very grateful for that, because I think even if I had nothing else and I have my faith, then
Yeah.
it will keep me going through the highs and lows of life.
Wow, I love that. And of course, there's got. I mean, there's some pretty big highs and lows in leadership, isn't there? Just in, and so,
Yeah.
what I was going to say, yeah. I mean, then I guess you've already alluded to this, but within that kind of faith, there's that idea of community and people to turn to, and you know, yeah, a support system, which I guess is difficult when you're a leader. Does it? Do you think it gets less? Do you reckon that support network shrinks the higher you go up in leadership?
I used to think that when I was a younger kind of teacher in the profession, lots of people would say, "Oh, it's really lonely at the top."
Yeah,
And as I've kind of climbed the career ladder, if that's what you want to call it, but become, it's more senior in my career, I think I've been really deliberate in keeping those support networks. And I think this is why I talk about networking a lot, because I think both those your personal networks of your friends and your family, and then also your professional networks are really important. And sometimes when you're in school, yet if you're an assistant head or a deputy or even a head teacher, it can feel a little bit lonely, because you're the person who's managing people, and you're having to tell people what to do and direct. But actually, if you've got that network behind you who you can lean on, so I've got a coach called Bookie Yusuf who's just amazing. I'll call her.
yeah,
This is what happened, Bookie. What did I do? And she'll kind of coach me and really advise me. And I think, yes, it can be lonely, but I do think we need to be quite deliberate and intentional in keeping and creating that support network.
yeah. That's a great takeaway already for leaders. That it will be lonely if you let it be
Yeah.
lonely. You have to proactively either maintain what you've got or grow it, or like you just said, seek out additional support in coaching, mentoring, that sort of stuff. Brilliant! What a great start. Well, let's move into the next bit then, because again, for those that are new, we have these things called ignition points, and the idea is that for most of us, we've had events in our lives that have transformed us, and whether we knew it at the time, but certainly further down the line, you think, oh my goodness, that really did have an impact. And so we're going to look at two of those today from Yamina. And the first one you both chose was dyslexia diagnosis. So yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, it wasn't until I was at university that I was actually a lecturer said, I think you might have dyslexia. She
Wow.
actually said it to me, which is because yeah, it was just a really powerful moment. I just said, no, I can't. What do you mean? I want to be an English teacher. I'm studying English
Yeah.
at Queen Mary University. And she said, look, I think you should just go for the diagnosis. Why don't you go and do the kind of short test at the university? And I did, and then they recommended me for the longer test, like, and I was really scared. So I grew up in a culture where it's kind of a taboo to talk about these sorts of things, and I
Right.
struggled through school. Actually, I loved learning so much, but in the classroom, one, I was really shy, which nobody ever believes anymore, but I was a very shy person and a child. And like, I'd sit in lessons and I would struggle to keep up the pace of reading. So there'd be one of my English teachers would say, "Oh, you're going to do shared reading with the person sitting next to you," and my peer would say, 3 minutes later, "Are you done?" And I'm still on like third line, and I
Wow.
didn't realize there were so many things that I was masking. And it's only once I had my dyslexia diagnosis that all of a sudden everything made sense, that I
Right.
didn't feel stupid anymore. Like, I just thought I was really slow, or why is my brain not processing things? And I would have to go home. I remember going home as a child and like reading the dictionary, memorizing spellings.
Wow.
Yeah, and I like having to every day I'd read a dictionary. It's one of the sad facts about me. But because I just really struggled with spelling, I remember having to reread any work that I'd done. I'd go home and read, and which is kind of good practice. But I
Yeah.
just couldn't do it because I had not processed it in that moment. And once I got my dyslexia diagnosis, it was all of a sudden like, oh wow, okay, I'm not stupid. There's actually, things that there's something that has that makes me slightly different, slightly unique. And
Yeah.
it was scary. I did cry for like 5 days. And I was scared to tell my parents because I didn't know how it's really. My Bengali. I'm from a British Bangladeshi background, and my like home language isn't very good anyway. Like, I'm not very fluent. So trying to explain dyslexia
Well, yeah. Wow.
who don't really understand that anyway, was a real challenge. Until my like university was amazing. They accommodated, they gave me a laptop, they showed me how to use specific like tools. Some people might say AI tools, but like technology to really help me kind of read from a computer, or gave me a printer so I could print all my work and I'd have time to process it. It was just loads of amazing things and strategies. Like, oh, I'm not stupid. And I think
Yeah.
since that day, I was like 20-year old. Once I had that diagnosis and I'd learned strategies and things that I could ask for as a reasonable adjustment from, my when I went on to do my PGC at the Institute of Education, when I went on to become a teacher and a leader, I feel a lot more confident in asking for the reasonable adjustments. But
Yeah.
up until that point, I was just masking and struggling through life. And actually, I think if I told somebody in school, then maybe I would have had that extra time that I actually needed.
Yeah.
So I got no extra time obviously in schools, and everyone was shocked because I didn't get A's and A stars,
Right.
and but all my coursework was A's and A stars, and nobody
Um,
could understand. And I myself was just like, oh, I must be just really bad at exams, or I'm really stupid. And actually, once I got that diagnosis, that was the year that I got what a first in my that
there you
year.
go.
I ended up getting a first. And I think that made me realize that it's really important for me to speak up and
Mm,
advocate for myself. And it's taken me years to still do that. Sometimes I feel a bit embarrassed to be like, oh, by the way, can I have that PowerPoint? Or
sure.
can you share that data set with me before we talk about it in SLT? And
Yeah.
that's been really powerful actually, because now I can bring thoughtful conversation, whereas before I'd sit in an SLT meeting and have nothing to say because I hadn't processed that data
No.
or those questions or that presentation in the same way. And it wasn't because it was just because my brain just works differently. So I've got
Yeah.
my verbal processing, and my brain is like a computer that's buffering, is the way my
Right.
psychologist described it. It's got all the information, but it just takes me a little bit longer to find that information. So I'm just
Yeah.
buffering. But once I've got it, I've got it.
Love that. That's really, I was going to say, fascinating, but it's also quite worrying, isn't it? I wonder how many other people are working below their optimal level, and because of some things that not easy to fix, but could be addressed. That's quite worrying, isn't it? I mean, I wonder how many, again, a reflection for leaders about whether they know as much as they think they know about the staff that they work for. Um,
That's been a really powerful thing. Like when I was a school leader, we talked about neurodiversity a lot
mm,
for young people, and obviously it's really on the news at the moment, like Send and Inclusion, and Jamie Oliver's just done a Dyslexia Revolution documentary, and with my friend Francis Akinde. But one of the things that we don't talk about much is dyslexia, and Francis, who's a SEND specialist, was actually saying that dyslexia is the largest kind of neurodiverse
right.
diagnosis in the country for adults, so not
Yeah,
for young people, but for
imagine.
adults. So that must mean that there's so many people like me who've gone through life masking, putting up with things, just believing that they're not good enough. But actually, a reasonable adjustment or real understanding into
Yeah,
those things is really important. And I do think it starts obviously with the children in our schools,
yeah,
and it's not just about mixing up letters, because I it's not that for me. It's more about, it just takes me a little bit longer to process things. I
right.
need a bit more time, and once I've got the spelling, I get it, but it just, I have to imagine things,
Yeah,
and I just thought that was normal. And until
no,
the dyslexia diagnosis, I didn't realize that that was actually quite unique. um,
yeah,
and there's only a small percentage of people who actually are dealing with it. And I think, as a child, I remember the psychologist saying, "Oh, you found strategies to help you manage." And there are so many young people and adults who are probably doing the same thing,
yeah,
who haven't been officially diagnosed.
yeah. And the other thing I thought when you were talking about that is that idea of, you know, um, I mean, it's a bit binary, but we can't change what we're not aware of.
Mm,
It's just not possible, is it? And so that idea that, once you become aware of something, you're more able to deal with it and to work with it. And then the other thing that I thought was really interesting, and it talks a little bit back to that idea of having a coach,
mm,
is that, we're usually not we're not usually great at fixing ourselves or becoming aware of ourselves. Our blind spots are our blind spots for a reason. And so having somebody else who can, as you said, kind of go, hang on a minute, no, you're not thinking that properly, is super helpful. A personal connection for me actually with dyslexia is my brother-in-law is profoundly, well, if that's even a thing, dyslexic to the point where he struggles to go very far on his motorbike because he can't read road signs. And so if he's in an unfamiliar place or finds himself somewhere, he struggles to read the road signs and can't get home. And I remember him having a really awkward time, and he's got through it now, a bit like yourself, found some strategies, but it had an impact on him as a parent because he had a really deep sense of anxiety thinking that he'd have to read to his daughter, and that was really sad for me. I was thinking, for somebody who I don't think I've got dyslexia, but for somebody who that hasn't been a big thing and reading has not been an issue, it never dawned on me that that would cause a lot of anxiety. And the good news is that he lent into that and was 10% braver, I guess, and almost kind of relearnt to read by reading to his daughter.
mm.
And it became this joyous thing. So, yeah, there we go.
Oh, you're going to make me cry. It's only 9 o'clock. Um,
That's not one of the questions. When did you ask?
oh,
It's a nice story. That is a nice story. Brilliant. Right then, let's move on before we all start crying to the first launchpad, which is really interesting because I'm glad that you picked this one because it's not the sexiest one in the book, and I thought, great, someone picked it, and so I'm just going to share the slide for those that are watching this on video, and yeah, so Yamina's picked this one called "Managing Underperformance." And it's probably one of those ones that is super tricky. It's a bit like managing behaviour, I suppose, in the classroom. It's always different, and so there's no sort of one way to do it, and it's tricky, and people don't like it. And as teachers, it's not a natural skill of ours. Anyway, so I'll talk you through what I was thinking when I made the kind of launch pad, and then we can ask Yamina why she chose it. And so the first thing that came to mind when I was kind of rereading and thinking about this was that kind of any efforts to address performance concerns have to be rooted in partnership, again, linking back to coaching, I suppose, and our jobs in this kind of managing underperformance is to understand before being understood. It's that kind of Stephen Covey stuff. And I wanted to kind of push that a little bit in that you're there as a partner, genuinely trying to help somebody overcome that underperformance. And so when I started doing some of the reading, some of the questions that came out, and the first one really shocked me because I hadn't really thought about the distinction here. The first one was, is it underperformance or is it misconduct? And I thought, oh, wow. It took me a while to think, oh, they are different, aren't they? I guess we're probably all underperforming in some element of our role day to day. Certainly me as a parent, that's for sure. But in terms of misconduct, that's slightly different. And we probably need to delve a bit deeper and to treat these in slightly different ways. So the next question that came up was, does the individual know they're underperforming? Again, goes back to that kind of awareness thing. The next one being, do they know what the level of performance that is expected? Because I guess you don't know if you're underperforming unless you've got a clear idea of what's expected. And I do that a lot, and I'm sure you do, Yamina, working with teachers who have been told that their classroom practice is not good enough, but effectively they've never had a clear mental model of what effective practice is. So in their minds, they didn't realise, that they had to give 3 seconds of wait time between asking a question and asking for a response and things like that. So that's a key question. And then there's this idea of, is it kind of that they can't perform as required? So do they not have the kind of knowledge, skills and resources? Or is it something about, is it quite temporary? Is it something about being in the moment? So is it that they're underperforming in that moment? Because that's an interesting one. One being very temporal. So is there something going on that's causing you to underperform this week? Or is this a longer term thing? And then, of course, we find that distinction between, it's a bit broad, but, skill and will. Is it a skill thing? Do they not have the expertise? Or is it that they won't perform? So is it about motivation or even poor management, which is also quite usually a tricky one when you're managing underperformance, but you're the reason that they're underperforming. That's always a nasty one. So then I started trying to think about maybe there is some sort of structure that at least you could loosely follow. And broadly what came out when I was doing the reading was this idea of step one, identify the problem. And that needs to be a kind of collaborative exploration, I guess. Assess and analyse that, in terms of how serious this is, how long has it been going on, how far away from the kind of desired standard are you. Then, of course, there's this idea of meeting, and that's probably what sends most people kind of get shivers up their back about that awkward conversation. And if I would imagine you're like me in that we rose through layers of leadership within one organisation. And so very quickly you can find yourself managing your old friends, or managing people who, used to be your NQT mentor and stuff like that, which is super tricky. So obviously you need to meet. And then this idea of kind of describe the issue, explain the impact, and then it's about seeking to understand. And then the bit that I think potentially is not done collaboratively is this planning. Okay, we know what it is. We've got an idea of probably where it's coming from. Let's work together now to create a plan to get this fixed. And then, of course, the last one is not to make a plan, send them off, and then keep your fingers crossed. There is this idea of kind of monitoring as you go along. So I tripped over that as an interesting kind of framework. And then I started thinking, is there something even lower down, even more foundational? And of course, not like most things to do with humans, relationships are absolutely key. And the stronger your relationships are with the people that you have to manage, the easier these conversations become. But also well-being, we can't lose sight of the fact that we don't perform well when we're not well. And we really, really have to look to that first. Because again, you can paper over the cracks with a training course or a webinar or something, but if this person's not well, then it'll just resurface. And of course, motivation is a complex thing as well. And so, yeah, so that was where I was when I sort of kind of came across it. But why did it resonate with you, Yamina?
I, like you said, it's not the sexiest thing, but it's the thing that most leaders will have to do at some
Yeah,
point in their career. I think the reason I chose it is because one, I love the framework, and I thought the way that you ask those questions or pose those questions are really powerful for leaders to be able to ask themselves, oh, actually, is it underperformance or is it misconduct? Because misconduct is a completely different thing, right? Whereas underperformance, particularly as somebody who has led and kind of led teaching and learning, most of my work was going and let's go and do learning walks, monitor teaching and learning, give people feedback. That is literally part of my job, and I loved it. But I was never really explicitly taught how to then have those kind of challenging conversations, how to manage the underperformance, and then support someone to essentially enhance their practice if it was required. And I think, I went and sought that out. So, I went and did courses with Diana Asagi. If you don't know Diana Asagi,
yeah,
she is incredible. But she did this fantastic course around like different conversations and how to actually identify things like, managing, how to identify people who might be underperforming versus somebody who might just need a conversation or might need that additional support. And I became a bit obsessed with it because I'm really very much uncomfortable, let's put it like with confrontation. I just don't
indeed.
like it. I'm like somebody who wants to live in fairyland, just want to imagine that everyone's amazing and it's fine. But the truth is, sometimes, like you said it in the launch pad, sometimes it is linked to other deeper things. And until we do identify the issue and like meet to have that conversation, we're never going to really understand it and then be able to support them. Because like you said, sometimes it's not, underperformance as such, but it might be just that one moment, or maybe, they've actually got something bigger happening that they've brought into work. Because we can't, you can't take those things, you can't separate personal and professional. It's just not possible. We are whole humans. And I think, like, I read this book called Radical Candor by Kim Scott. It's just
Yeah,
one of the best books because it makes it really objective, and I really like the way in which she actually talks about how this is be kind, and to be
yeah,
clear is to be kind. And for me, I grew up thinking kind was like being generous and
yeah,
always giving everything of yourself to others. But here I've learned, and through leadership I've learned, that actually being clear to somebody and saying, hey, I just noticed, like, when I popped in a few times to your lesson, I've noticed that, these particular students are perhaps not, whatever it is, whatever the issue is, and having that direct conversation, people actually appreciate it.
yeah,
And
yeah,
some people do get upset because for so many people like me, teaching is my identity. It's my personal identity. It's everything about me, and so it can feel very personal, like an attack. And actually, I had to learn to really differentiate that and say, let's focus on like identifying the issue. What is the specific thing that we're focusing on? It's not a personal attack. Like you say to a student, it's the behavior that I'm not happy with, not you
yes,
really. And I love the launchpad because it's just very clear about how you might even tackle a conversation, especially if you, like me, are uncomfortable with those sorts of conversations. So that really resonated with me, and I think also what I really found powerful in that launchpad was that relational approach. I don't think as a leader you can even get to talk to people about their underperformance if you haven't built a trust, and that relational approach is so important, because if people know, Jazz Amplify says, fighting for the highest possible good of those you lead.
right,
And people know that you are fighting for their highest possible good, then they will know, oh, okay, Yamina's going to tell me something that's going to help me because she wants the best for me. And I think if people genuinely believe that, then they're more likely to take the feedback from you and say, right,
yeah,
okay, you know what, right, you're saying this because you know that this is this is really important for me to work on, to develop, and you want the best for me, so yeah, okay, I will take that on board. And so as I've learned to kind of manage those relationships, so much of that, even before I get to managing underperformance, I spend ages, and I recommend leaders spend long time really building relationships with staff and really making the time to get to know the whole person, the whole teacher, rather than just a high by in a corridor. And that, again, I talk about deliberate and being deliberate and intentional with that. And it not, some people say, oh, is that inauthentic? No, in a very authentic way. Ask people how their day is, talk to them about ask them, if you ask them about their weekend on a Friday, you see them on the Monday, ask them, how was it? How did that game go? How was that? How's your because people really, I mean, I appreciate it.
Yeah, we love it.
I loved it. Anytime my head teacher gave me a smile, I said, "Oh, I remember you said, oh yeah, thanks for asking."
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And then I'm more likely to take feedback from that person. I'm more likely to, believe that they want the best for me and to
yeah,
trust that individual has me at the center of what they're saying rather than trying to catch me out in some way.
yeah,
Like my NQT mentor, Teresa Dunseith, used to say, catch people being good. That was her motto.
yeah. I
She would
love it.
spend time just catching people being great. And I think I've taken that feedback on board as a leader. And so I think a managing underperformance is something that people don't like to talk about or want to
No.
accept that they'll have to do, but you don't have to do it. And I've seen too many leaders, I think, mess it up to the
Yeah,
point where somebody will quit. They'll leave the job. And lots of I can't remember who said it, but they said something like people don't quit their jobs, they don't leave their jobs, they leave their bosses.
yeah,
And I just think that is so powerful. And I think you kind of touch on that in the launch pad as well, because sometimes it is about poor management. And
yeah,
again, that's a really hard thing to take. Like, oh, it's me, I'm the problem.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's like that TikTok. Am I the problem? Am I the drama? Yeah, maybe you are the drama. And I think, coaching really supports with that and can
Yeah.
support us as leaders in identifying ways in which we can manage underperformance that feels authentic to us. But it needs to be done because far too many of us will leave it
Yeah.
and just pretend that the problem is not going to go away, and it gets worse. And like Kim Scott says in Radical Candor, that person will come back to you and say, "Why didn't you tell me?
Yeah. Oh, they will.
You didn't tell me.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, they were, this class wasn't performing well, or I need to do this differently." And then it does feel personal.
yeah.
So yeah.
I had what I thought at the time was a really strange experience with a new line manager. This is a few years ago, and it's now become something I try to do. And they said when we first met, chit chats, get to know each other a little bit, and they said, "Oh, of course, at some point during our relationship, I'm going to have to talk to you about underperformance. How do you prefer to have that?" It was almost like it's going to happen. Do you have a preferred way of receiving feedback, or? And I was a bit thrown by it, and it was a great conversation, and I hadn't thought about that. I ended up saying things like, "I like clarity. I like to be set very manageable goals, and so on and so on." But it was fascinating because, of course, when that happened, like I don't know, a week later, when I was underperforming, um, that conversation was a lot easier, which is funny. And then the other one that came to mind when you were just saying that is some of that stuff that you can eat. Stephen Covey calls them emotional bank accounts. Brene Brown would use the kind of marbles in the jar sort of analogy. But I think that's fascinating in that if we think that upsetting someone or making someone feel uncomfortable is a withdrawal or a marble out, as long as you've got enough credit in that jar, then you can survive the odd marble out, can't you? But if you haven't invested in putting credit into the jar, then there's nothing to take out. That's interesting.
That. I love that. I
Yeah.
love Stephen Covey as well.
Oh
In
my
his
God. Yeah.
Speed of Trust book,
Bonkers.
revolutionize the way in
Yeah.
which I talk about credibility and building trust. Such a good book. I actually I somehow managed to get it into the Thriving in Your First Years.
Oh, did you?
Yeah,
Amazing.
I talked about like how it's really important, even as a new teacher, to build that kind of credibility with your
Yeah.
own class, and
Got
it
to.
does. I think we can be great as teachers in building those kind of relational approach and that
Mm.
relational trust in our own classrooms. But once we become a leader, it's like we've forgotten all those things.
Oh, absolutely. So funny. Right then. Well, let's keep moving on. So we're going to talk about your next fast friends question, and this one you chose was, "What is your most treasured memory?"
Oh,
Wow,
yeah, I will cry. I might. I have a habit of crying when I talk about my
I love
parents.
that.
I was thinking about there's so many big memories, aren't there? And lots of people will probably talk about their big treasure memory, but I've got this one memory of my dad, and I'm my parents are like they were just the life and soul, and they were center of my life. And when I was younger, so from I born and bred in like Tower Hamlets, which is a borough in East London,
Right.
and I wasn't allowed like to go anywhere else. So even at university, I had to go to Queen Mary, which is the local university,
Okay.
but I still had to go there. And then eventually, I was like, "Dad, I want to, try something different.
Yeah.
And I decided to apply for the Institute of Education, which was, by the way, just in a different borough. It wasn't even out of London.
Okay.
It's but that was a big deal to my parents. But one of the things that my dad would do, and this is my treasured memories, I remember it like I was on the bus home from Mile again, not far from where I grew up, which is Canary Wharf. And it's just one bus. And I called my dad. I was like, "Oh, Dad, it's raining." And he said, I know, love. Don't worry, it'll be fine." So okay, I'm gonna be home soon. I'll be like 20 minutes, literally 20-minute bus ride. He was like, "Okay." I get to the bus stop and I get off the bus at home, and my dad's there, and it's pelting it down with rain, and he's just there with an umbrella,
I love it.
like, and I'm just like, what? And by the way, my dad was elderly. I had older parents, so he was
Okay.
probably like at this point in his probably like 60s. He was really fit, and I mean that's a big deal when you're a kid. But like he was in his mid 60s, maybe late 60s or early 70s, but just really fit and healthy. Anyway, healthier
Yeah.
than he was even at that time, and just stood there and been waiting all that time with an umbrella. And I just thought,
Amazing.
oh my god, this man, like, he
Yeah.
was incredible. And that's just one of many memories like that. And I
Yeah.
think the reason I chose that is because love is in those quiet moments.
Love
So
that. Yeah.
many of us think about love as being these big, huge things like my wedding day or my dad and my master's graduation. But for me, love is in those quiet moments. And
Yeah.
my mum was like, "Where did you go?"
Yeah.
Went up to pick up Yamina from the bus stop. You know, it was raining, and I got really worried and that was just him. And that I was, by the way, 22. So younger people who like leave home, and I was just down the road. But that was just my dad, and he was like that all the way until even when he was ill and living with cancer, and he was still like, "Come and eat at my house. I've
Yeah.
made you curry. I've made you your favorite food." Just the most incredible human. But yeah, that's my treasured memory.
I love that. And it's so true and something that we do forget. And again, I don't think there's some strong links to leadership there. And we talked about it a little bit before, you know, the odd hello, how are you from someone you're not expecting, certainly if they're superior, the odd, the one line email that just says, "Thank you so much for today. You're amazing," from somebody that you respect.
Yes.
It goes such a long way. And again, to link back, they're just deposits. All of them are deposits in the account. And I think as leaders, we shouldn't forget or ignore the power that we have to make, I guess, sadly, or break somebody's day with little things like that.
I think that's the thing that we can forget because it's so busy, particularly in school leadership. You're chasing this student, you're having to follow this thing up. There's more admin, and actually, like I said, love is in the quiet moments. And
Mm.
I did used to use love in leadership, and people would laugh at me.
Oh, I
And I
like
said,
that.
but I do genuinely do it from a
Yeah,
place of love and care because ultimately that's how people have been with me. So the leaders that really supported me, empowered me, grew me were the people who loved me even when it was hard, the
yeah,
people who showed me care and attention even when actually it wasn't a big moment. And you're right, those everyday micro moments are what build you as a leader and the way in which people perceive you, because people know when it's inauthentic.
oh
When
yeah,
you give a well-being day, a huge gift at the end of the year to say thank you, actually people just prefer an email, like you said, or
yeah.
it doesn't even have to cost anything. And I think that really goes with definitely with leadership. I mean, my dad was the best leader. So was my mum. Actually, she was scary though. She was like strict.
Oh, I love
My
that.
dad was like warm. It was perfect.
Oh, that's so nice. Brilliant. Well, thanks ever so much for sharing that, because I'm sure that's not it's nice and sad at the same time. Um, well, let's talk about your second kind of ignition day then.
Yes.
Ignition point. Sorry, I got day in my head now. Yeah, ignition point. And you wrote down post wedding day. We joked offline that you didn't know what to call this, but your husband said, "Yeah, just call it that." So tell us a bit what happened.
I really struggled to pinpoint a moment, but I realized, so I've said earlier that I grew up in a very strict Bengali household. I went to school, to university in my borough, and then I went and did, my PGC somewhere, I mean, still in London. And so I've grown up in a very sheltered world. And I'm very honest about the fact that I've grown up in a very sheltered world in some ways and not so sheltered in other ways. And I remember my mum used to say, so I never get to talk about this, it's so exciting. But my mum and parents used to say, when you get married, you can do whatever you want. But up until this time, you're the
Okay.
princess. You know that classic line, you're
Yeah,
the
yeah.
princess. So
Not
marriage,
under my house.
so lots of people will be like, marriage is hell, it's a trap. And I'm the opposite.
Come
The
on.
minute, I mean, my husband, most people in education, whenever I go to an event, have met my husband Mohammed because he's there. He will literally quietly support me. He'll drive me to all my events. He'll go halfway across the world with me,
I
and
know.
and for me, once I got married, and that's why I didn't know what to call it because once I got married, it was like a strange like level of freedom that I had, but also this incredible support that I've just had since that day. We got married 9 years ago
Right.
next week, and genuinely, I wouldn't be able to do any of these things, Chris, without him,
I love
because
that.
he will. Like, I'm quite like scared, and
Yeah.
people know that I don't like driving far. I've never got on a plane by myself. So he will literally, like, we were in Belfast for one of the research heads in, I think it was last September, October. He flew with me. He paid for himself, flew with me,
Oh my
took me there,
goodness.
and that for me is like, I think is a real sign of great leadership. Like, he's a
Yeah.
former teacher, he's now works for the civil service, but he will like work around me so that
Yeah.
he can take me to these events and support me. And I think for me that was a really key point in my life because genuinely I tracked it back. I was like, before then,
Yeah.
I was like quietly stalking Ed Sheeran on Twitter.
Yeah.
It's really weird. And people would say, well, do you want to come and speak? And I said, no, thank you.
No,
Not
no, no.
happening. But because I have had his support, and because he will drive me everywhere and do whatever I ask him to do, because he's just the best human being, it has meant that this life that I now get to lead 9 years later
Yeah.
of freelance consultancy, of like getting to speak on podcasts, speak at events as a keynote, has been empowered by him, and not
Wow.
because of any other reason, but because he will just say, yeah, okay, I'll make that work. If you,
Yeah.
that's what you need from me, that's what I'll do. And he's just, in that sense, it's quite similar to my dad, I guess, like those kind of
Yeah.
traits of unconditional love in so, and love in so many ways is just so powerful and has been such a important part of my life for the last, yeah, just a decade, I would say now.
Yeah. That is so cool. And I feel like I need to meet this man now. I'm going to, oh my God,
Honestly,
I
everyone's
want to, I want to meet him. But there's a theme there, isn't there? And in that you're as good as you are because of the support that's around you.
yeah.
That must be quite comforting to know that you can take risks because you know someone's got your back.
Oh, absolutely. Honestly, when I told him, by the way, 2 days after my book launch, so like somebody in the book launch said, "Oh, are you living your values? Are you doing what you love?"
Mm.
And that was it. 2 days later, I'm not joking. I wrote my resignation letter and said to my husband, "Do you support me? Because
Yeah,
I'm going to be like, let's be honest, I'm going from a set head pay in inner London to basically nothing."
yeah,
And he said, "Do whatever you want. You do what you love, and of
yeah.
course, that's what I'm here
And I'll
for."
support you.
And that's been the kind of, you're absolutely right now when I think about it, that theme of everybody who's supported me, and that support network from like the coaches I've had, the mentors I've had, the leaders that I've had, that I've worked with in schools, outside of schools, those networks like Women Ed and BAMED and diverse educators have all been that support network who've empowered me, who've given me, I mean, I was quite shy, as I said, and who've like given me a voice
Yeah,
in a way of like making me realize that my voice is powerful, and really supported me. And as kind of somebody who's like visibly Muslim and has faced racism and Islamophobia as I was growing up and into even in my career, actually knowing that I've got people who will look after me, who will be that support network, has been really empowering, to the point where now I'm a bit of a risk taker, and I never thought I'd be like that. I will say things that I would never have said five
no,
years ago, just because I feel like if I say this, I know people have got my back.
yeah,
And that's such an important part of leadership, isn't it?
yeah,
Like you said at the beginning, it can be lonely, but that's why we have to be deliberate and intentional in those support networks.
yeah. And that's really fascinating. I mean, as I said before at the very beginning, the aim of the podcast is to get a sense of how did you get to where you are, and that's really important because it feels like we would not be benefiting from you now if the dyslexia wasn't diagnosed, if you hadn't met your husband, like we genuinely, the world would be a lesser place if those things hadn't have happened. And that's great for you. The sadness, I suppose, is are we missing out on other greatness because those people haven't had those benefits?
Oh yeah, I come across teachers and leaders like that all the time, by the way.
Yeah.
Lots of people will say to me, how did you get to where you are? Like,
Yeah.
what is it that you've done? And I honestly, it's very sweet, but like, I honestly do not believe. I'm just ordinary. I'm quite an
Yeah.
ordinary person. If you ever see me, I'm watching EastEnders most of the times. Like, I'm
Yeah.
proper cockney. Like, and actually, absolutely right in saying each of those kind of big and small moments make us who we are, but behind all of those things are people and humans who've supported and kind of, and I think everyone's got that, but
Yeah.
it's finding those people, and that's why I guess I'm in parts of, like, I volunteer for organizations like Women Ed. I've just, like, well, not just, but a year ago I co-founded an organization called South Asian Educators Network, because a
Okay.
lot of South Asian educators will come to me because I guess I'm quite visible in the kind of
Yeah.
education sector now, and say, well, can I have some coaching? Can I have some support? Who do I turn to? And actually, talking about some of the discrimination they face or the barriers they're facing, or even just wanting that support and understanding, because and having being able to provide that. And so that's why I do things like that, because I think for those people who don't have what I've been very, very blessed to have,
Yeah.
how can we continue giving? That's the legacy, isn't it? Like,
I think it is.
somebody once said, we're always looking to how do we, like, leave a legacy, but how do we live a legacy?
Yeah.
And that is in everything that we do. Like, are we living the legacy that we eventually then want to leave? Just, I thought that was so powerful, and I can't remember who said it now, but it was just really powerful.
I love that. Amazing. Right. Well, let's move on to your second kind of launch pad then. So this one, I think, again, is sadly, we wouldn't want it to be, but it's quite, we are sadly in a kind of recruitment and retention crisis in teaching. And so the one that Yamina chose, this one is called Love the Ones You're With. And I guess, like most of the launch pads, I will have been at a conference or something and someone's said it, or just, and I'm like, oh my God, scribbling down these phrases, which then become something a bit bigger. So when I was thinking about this, I was almost, well, I'll read it out for you. I mean, this idea of, for people that are listening to this, we're all in on professional development, but we're not the majority. We are not. Not everybody feels this way. Not everybody puts as much effort in as they probably should do. So this idea that professional development is an investment worth making if we want sort of sustainable success. So not kind of stick in plaster, fix what's right in front of you. If we want, a sustainably good school or trust or education sector, then PD is kind of where it's at. And so I started thinking about this distinction between, you know, do you deal with kind of, oh, well, they left, let's recruit another person. Oh, well, they left, let's recruit another person. Or do you think, hang on a minute, let's be an organization where no one ever leaves, And randomly, something just jumped into my mind, and I don't remember what book it was. It was an American sort of some sort of popular psychology, but I remember being shocked hearing about an organization that once you've been there for 3 months, they paid you to leave. And I remember thinking, what are you talking about? And this idea was like, we will pay you, I think, let's say $5,000 to leave. And the idea was, if you left, then good riddance. But if we've done our job properly, you don't want to leave for any amount of money. And I thought, that's fascinating. Could you create an organization so good that you couldn't pay people to leave? Anyway, I'll have to dig out that book at some point. So then I started thinking about the damage that I guess that sort of recruitment cycle, creates. And obviously we've got this idea of expertise loss, which you go, okay, yeah, fair enough, but we'll recruit somebody else. But there's so much deep, deep knowledge that people acquire from being in an organization, that it's not easy to replace that. I don't think we talk about it in here, but that idea of tacit knowledge, the stuff that you can't learn in a book or learn on a course, you just pick it up through experience. It takes 20 years to acquire that. So you can't just lose someone and then just pick it back up again. So expertise loss is a big thing. I wrote about instability. I mean, naturally, when someone leaves, the relationships they had break. Potentially, people around them get dips in confidence. Certainly, if it was somebody who they looked up to or leaned into, I suppose. And then something which is a worrying trend at the moment is that we don't have the money to replace people. So one person leaves, and because there's no money to replace them, their workload gets distributed amongst other staff, and then you get a kind of workload issue. Then I started thinking about kind of resource cost. I mean, I'm a bit more distant from this, but when I talk to my HR team in my trust, it's not cheap to recruit people, just in terms of even logistics, adverts, interview days, all that sort of stuff. So that's a consideration. And the last one, I suppose, is just that kind of hidden cultural shift, which I guess it would be nice to think of it as a positive. Like, imagine working in a culture where no one's left in the last 5 years. What does that do to everybody's feelings about the organisation? And, again, randomly, this has just jumped into my head, but whenever I walk down streets and I see like 7 or 8 houses for sale, I think, oh, I'm not sure I want to live on this street. If everyone's leaving, then there's something going on. And that might be similar here. If suddenly an organisation is losing a lot of staff, then potentially that has an impact on its culture. And then, of course, we've got the development side, which I think we're all on the same page about how great that is. And if you develop people, you typically improve their performance. You typically improve collaboration because people feel safer to if getting better and underperformance is just part of life, then actually people feel safer to admit weakness and to say, I might need some help with this. I'm struggling a little bit, and as we know, it becomes increasingly hard to do that higher up in leadership you go. So that's important. Then this idea of belonging, which we know again is one of those secret things that you can't measure it, but you know it when you don't feel it, and people regularly cite that as a reason for leaving. So it's something we cannot take our eye off. And then of course, if it's a decreasing culture for frequent recruitment, then it's an increasing culture for development. But yeah, why did this resonate with you, Yamina?
I think it leans into the idea of love that I mentioned,
Okay.
and in the roles, and what I love doing is really talking about teaching and learning and thinking of ways in which we develop colleagues across the sector. And it's one of the things that I used to love doing. I really miss doing, actually, probably more so because when you're in a school and you're working with those colleagues and you can see it quite visibly. I think I also was a commissioner on teaching commission, which was
Yeah.
specifically um, with Dr. Mary Bowstead, which chaired it, and that was all about recruitment and retention, particularly in UK state schools. And the situation is dire, and we are
Mm.
losing teachers and hemorrhaging teachers because, and lots of them will cite things like you said, culture, not feeling a sense of belonging, and CPD, and not feeling like they're being developed. And actually, if we look at the way some schools are going, it's quite direct, very specific ways in which, CPD is being delivered. And then there's the opposite of like just a loose approach. And I think we need a middle ground. And that's the reason I chose the leadership launchpads. I think it makes it really clear why it's really important to invest in the staff who are within your school building, in your trust, who have committed. There's a reason they came to your trust. There's a reason they came to your school and chose your school. And something happens down the line that means they no longer feel a sense of connection with that purpose, with that vision, with that mission, or within themselves. And I think it's our job as leaders to really invest in those colleagues. I think I first heard it from Dylan Williams, who talks about loving the one you're with, but I'm sure it's like a bit like it's just a really well known phrase. And I think as leaders, we really need to think carefully about how we are investing in CPD and what CPD looks like for different colleagues across our school or our organizations, because again, a one size fits all model just doesn't work. And that's one of the things I love doing. Like when one of the things I set up in my last school was a whole school coaching program. We brought in somebody from external as an expert who then trained staff internally, so they gained a skill and an expertise in becoming a coach. And then what we would do is deploy those colleagues with staff, and it wasn't instructional coaching, it was pure non-directive coaching. People could talk about whatever they wanted, whether it's professional or personal, because we acknowledged that it was intertwined.
Yeah,
And actually what
absolutely.
we found was at the beginning it was still a bit of a taboo, like nobody wanted to be coached because it was
Yeah,
optional, and because it was seen that coaching was like the last thing before you go on a
yeah,
school run, right? Because that's what it used to be. And it took us a lot of really investment to say, and deliberate kind of promotion to say, actually no, this is a really powerful tool to keep people in the school, to
yeah,
because they feel invested in. Like
yeah,
you are telling me I'm going to get free 6 weeks worth of coaching or a term's worth of coaching to talk about something, that a bigger goal that I want to work on. How amazing is that? And one
yeah.
of the things that we did is we made, there were some groups of people who would have it automatically. So for example, parents who returned from maternity or paternity leave were
Okay.
given that as a, just, it was there as an
Yeah,
option.
like a resettler sort
Yeah,
of thing.
as a reset. And it was almost like a buddy approach. People who are new to the school, so again, creating that sense of belonging, feeling that sense of connection, but also feeling that you're connected to somebody,
Yeah,
and like new teachers, anything like that. And I think we need to think really deeply as a profession about what CPD looks like and
yeah,
how we personalize it for the people in front of us. And obviously this makes me redundant because one of the things that I do is like a freelance CPD trainer. But ultimately, like Jenny Webb talked about this the other day at one of the conferences, we want to make ourselves redundant, because
yeah,
what we want is for us to have in our schools to train up people, to develop them enough for them to be able to then lead that CPD.
yeah,
That's ultimately what you want. And I think, just the numbers when it comes to recruitment and retention is quite depressing. So we can talk about recruitment all we like. It's great, the government wants to invest in, what is it, not 6,000 teachers anymore, but whatever their number is now.
yeah,
What about the people who are in our school buildings? And this goes back to the project work that I'm doing, which is, specifically about training teachers and working with training teachers from like Black, Asian, and global majority backgrounds. But even those teachers from diverse backgrounds with protected characteristics, they're leaving far more than anybody else. So somebody who's neurodiverse, somebody who might be from the LGBTQ plus community, somebody who is from a global majority heritage, they're more likely to leave because they don't feel invested in, they don't feel like there's a sense of belonging, and they don't feel like they're being developed and they're being able to bring their authentic selves to this to what they're doing. And I think that's why I chose it, because I just thought it was a launch pad in my mind of,
yeah,
this is so much bigger than just employing people. It's about how we go create a school culture that means, like you said, people, you couldn't even pay people to leave. And I
yeah,
think it's really tough out there because there are so many other jobs that people could do that pay better and mean that we have a work-life harmony. But ultimately, and I feel like a hypocrite because I've just left the classroom, but ultimately what I believe is that teaching is the best profession. I will go back into it, I know that, but
yeah,
after 15 years of non-stop, I felt like I needed a little bit of a step back to
yeah,
impact the system in a different way. But I do think teaching needs to be like reframed as it is the best thing that we can do, and our job as leaders is to support those colleagues who are doing it.
yeah. Brilliant. And that's a call to action for everybody, and we should put it on record that neither me or Yamina really believes you should pay people to leave their jobs. We don't want to hear. There's other things you can spend money on, like textbooks, pens, that sort of thing. All right. Well, we're going to finish off now with your last Fast Friends question. And so this one, I mean, surely there's nothing to be fixed. What personal quality do you feel you need to develop the most?
Oh, that's very kind of you to say, but I am number one people pleaser. Like, if there was a league of people pleaser, I think I'm top of the league. But
Okay.
I'm really. it's one of the things that I wish I could let go of a little bit more, like people pleasing, particularly as kind of a leader. I do think that can be to a detriment where I'm trying to make everybody happy. And it's
Yeah.
taken me a very long time to even acknowledge that you cannot make everyone happy. So that is probably the personal quality. And that's both in my personal life and my professional life, by the way,
Okay.
that I wish I could kind of really develop a sense of being able to let go and just be
Yeah.
at ease and just accept that you're not going to always please everybody. And actually, sometimes I need to put myself first. But I guess that comes back to my faith. It's like a cyclical, like faith is all about like selflessness and servant
Of
leadership.
course.
And
Yeah.
I think that can sometimes be to a detriment, which is probably one of the reasons why I stepped out of schools, because I actually needed to stop pleasing other people, stop like putting other people first, and really believing that it's okay to take care of myself first.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what other people think, because I really care what other people think, and I
Yeah.
want to let go of that.
Yeah. Me too. And again, I think I had Rachel Johnson on recently, and again, she said that she struggled, but she now does it where she will literally protect time in her calendar for herself, and it sounds selfish, but actually, she's not her best when she's not well. Everybody doesn't benefit. Everyone is that sort of thing, and so again, a call to action for leaders, I suppose, to put yourself first sometimes, and maybe what's it on the plane? Put your oxygen mask on first before you help other people. Well, I mean, wow, what an amazing episode! Thank you so much. Tell us a bit about how people can connect with you and your work and the book and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, thank you so much. So you can, I'm on LinkedIn all the time. People are fed up with me. So you can mostly connect with me through LinkedIn, but I also have a website, which is just my name, yaminabb.co.uk. And I'm going to plug the project if that's okay, because I
Please
think it's
do. Yeah,
important. The Chartered College of Teaching have a website for diversity in ITT, so you can Google that and it'll come up, and you can find out more about that project and the work that we're doing to diversify the workforce and increase diversity in initial teacher training.
amazing. Well, we'll put all the links in the chat. And so, yeah, thank you to Yamina, and thanks to everyone for listening. And I'll see you at the next one.